Thanks indeed, Giuseppe. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Yes. So thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pity for me not being with you today. I'm very proud anyway to contribute to the opening of this very important event in my almost finished indeed role of director of the Dear Policy Institute, the Institute of Law, Politics and Development. And so I'm really happy and proud also because the Dear Policy Institute is historically, let me say, the first bridge between Pisa and China, between Chongqing University and the Scuola, between the Scuola and the Confucius Institute. Since 1992, and the strategic choice of Professor Padovani and Professor Busnelli to open this important cooperation with China. Dear Policy Institute is, as you maybe already know, a really interdisciplinary institute in terms of also cooperation between legal and socio-political studies and sciences. But Dear Policy is also a bridge with a lot of different disciplines at the Scuola. Economics, management, engineering, life sciences, namely medicine, and more in general green sciences. So I think a sort of keyword for the event of today could be properly bridge. Bridge between us and China, between Dear Policy and Confucius, and between different scholars. This is a bridge also between countries, between infrastructures, between universities and governments, in line with the content, the meaning and the vision of the Belt and Road Initiative, a flagship strategic initiative at this respect. Sometimes, as we know, it is defined as the new Silky Road, and is a very strategic global infrastructures development choice adopted by the government of China in 2013, involving 150 countries and many international organizations. I'm therefore particularly proud that Dear Policy and the Scuola, together with the Confucius Institute and the Chongqing University, can be a part, maybe a little part, but a significant part of this strategy, promoting again the dialogue between scholars on the most important challenges nowadays, from the first development of the initiative to the norm making, to the international law perspectives, to the geopolitical issues and conflict rules. As in the past, I really hope that this event will be both an arriving and always new starting point in the cooperation China-Italy, Dear Policy, Confucius. So thanks indeed again, and let me leave the floor to the colleague and friend Giuseppe Martinico for the presentation of the event and the continuation of these opening remarks. Thank you.
Thanks indeed. Gaetana. Thanks so much for your very kind words. It's really inspiring, I mean, to work with you under your intellectual leadership. And I think that we're all super happy, I mean, to kick off this event in particular. And I give the floor now to Professor Xueyan, who is the director of the Confucius Institute of Scuola Sant'Anna. Ready for you.
Is it okay to record? Yeah, it's okay. Thank you very much, Professor Morgante, for your very kind words about Confucius Institute, about Chongqing University, and about our cooperation. Dear colleagues and friends, good morning. And it's really my honor to welcome you to today's conference on the Belt Road Initiative. And since its launch in 2013, it has evolved from a bold vision to a most dynamic and debated platform for international cooperation. It has raised the questions about law, governance, and global partnership. That these questions continues to shape the academic and the policy discussion worldwide. 6 years ago, we held a conference dedicated to Belt Road and the Initiative. It brought together scholars from different backgrounds and led to the publication of book in 2020. Capturing many of the insights we shared together during the conference. And I'm really delighted to see some of the colleagues from that conference are here again today. And I warmly welcome our new colleagues who bring fresh perspectives and energy. Today's conference provide us not only a chance to reflect on what have been achieved under the Road and the Belt Initiative, but also an opportunity to look ahead, the challenges, new challenges, opportunities, and possibilities. Before we start, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Professor Giuseppe Martinico for his constant support and dedication to the cooperation. Most importantly, I would like to thank you all to this conference and for contributing your time, your ideas, your expertise. I wish you a pleasant and a rewarding day. And I also hope you have some time to enjoy the sunshine and the unique charm of the Tuscany region in this very beautiful season. Thank you very much. I would give.
Thanks indeed. Before giving the floor to Professor Confucius for his keynote speech, let me add a couple of things. I mean, we are very excited because we started working on the road initiative some years ago. I mean, thanks to the input, I mean, coming from the director. I remember that she kindly told me about a fellowship, you know, to conduct a research period in Beijing under the supervision and mentorship of Professor Kong at that time. And that was the starting point. And then with the Sant'Anna Legal Studies Group, we also organized some events on the Better Road Initiative, starting with the one you mentioned in 2019, so just before the pandemic. And the pandemic, of course, made everything more difficult, but we managed to organize another online event, thanks again to the support of the Confucius Institute. And in that event, we also involved Enrique, Imad, among others. They were not among the speakers of the first conference held in Pisa in 2019, but they were online with us in 2020. And we have a big project, actually, for our cooperation. We will tell you more at the end of this event, and no spoilers now. And having said that, I give again the floor to Professor Xueyan to introduce our keynote speaker, to Professor Kong, please.
Yeah. I think you are to Professor Qingjiang from the University of Political Science, a leading professor in the area of international economic law. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much.
This one?
This one right there. Actually, I put it now. All right, so that should. Well,
Right where you are. Thank you.
thank you so much. Yeah. Director Wu of the Confucius Institute of Pisa, Director Morgante of the Sant'Anna University, Professor Martinico of Sant'Anna University. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm most delighted and honored to deliver the so-called keynote speech at this important expert workshop on Belt and Road Initiative. I must convey my message of appreciation and thanks to the organizers of this expert workshop before delivering the speech. I think the Belt and Road Initiative, which was launched in 2013, has evolved into the world's largest platform for international cooperation. The BRI's achievement, which range from infrastructure connectivity, trade and investment facilitation, and the people-to-people and the cultural exchanges, are remarkable. It marks the 12th anniversary. It's time to assess its achievements and draw possible lessons therein. I think there are basically three approaches to such assessment of the broad development. First of all, the perspective of China certainly has its evaluation. And actually the 10th anniversary marked such efforts on the Chinese side to assess the broad. And certainly the US has a very special perspective of the broad since the very beginning. And of course, certain scholars, including European scholars, have also their own perspective of the BRI. So in this regard, I think it's, first of all, let's start from the Chinese perspective. Basically, China regards this BRI is a very successful international initiative. Since its launch 12 years ago, thanks to the combined efforts of all parties, the collaboration under the BRI framework has expanded beyond the border of China and becoming a truly international effort. By mid-2025, China has signed basically more than 150 agreements, with countries. We call them participating countries of the BRI, and more than 30 international agreements with international organizations. And this has generated more than 200 cooperation frameworks, even though these agreements or MOUs or whatever are not necessarily legally binding international treaties, but they are more than 200 agreements or MOUs between China and the rest of the world. Indeed, the BRI has evolved from ideas into actions, from a vision into reality, and from a general framework into concrete projects. According to China's observation, the BRI has been welcomed by the international community, both as a public good and a collaboration platform, and this has achieved solid results. The BRI has contributed to the global infrastructure connectivity, which made way for sound development, economic globalization, and helped resolve global development challenges and improve the global governance system as well. It has opened up a new path for all humanity to realize modernization. In this regard, possibly I should introduce a little bit about China's modernization. China, what has achieved over the 4 decades has been coined, a term has been coined for the internationalization or to the development in China, which is called the Chinese modernization. And this modernization was regarded as different from the existing modernization path. So for China, the Belt and Road Initiative opened up a new path for all other countries, particularly the developing countries, to realize their modernization and ensure that the efforts to build a global community of shared futures. In this regard, I think we possibly have heard a global community of shared future or community of shared future for all mankind. That is associated, strongly connected with the Belt Road Initiative. Certainly, I will introduce later. Despite such grandiose discourse, the perspective of China focuses on the infrastructural connectivity and its direct ramification. Of course, it's also based on such structural connectivity and its direct ramification. Over the past dozen years, BRI Corporation has delivered real gains in this regard, in infrastructure connectivity to the participating countries. After all the BRI is characterized with infrastructure connectivity and economic corridors. Infrastructures, projects, and economic corridors are the driving force of the BRI, and also from the Chinese perspective, they are also the drivers that drive the BRI. I think it might be fair to say the global infrastructure connectivity has reached a scaling new heights. Just want to mention the running of the China-EU Railway Express, and this operates over more than 3,000 trains annually, more than 7,000 trains annually, connecting more than 200 cities in 25 European countries. And more notably are the railway infrastructure construction, or port construction, and air routes and airport construction. I certainly will not have time. I do not have time to go into the very details, but nevertheless, I will try to highlight the major projects that I think are strategic In terms of railway infrastructure, I believe the Mombasa-Nairobi Railway must be mentioned. And this railway connects the capital of Kenya and the important port of this country. So basically it connects the hinterland of the country and a seaport. Chinese enterprises undertook the construction and provide a series of technical support for the railway, including railway design, construction, and technology, and equipment manufacturing, ensure the high quality completion operation of the project. And the 480-kilometer long railway was open to traffic using Chinese standards, technologies, and equipment. And if you happen to be there, to visit the railway, you can even find those people who are involved in the running of the railway. Actually, they look like the Chinese workers, the Chinese technicians, and the Chinese managerial staff in terms of their appearance. Of course, all the the communication signal system or so on and so forth, actually, basically a copy of the Chinese railway system. It has accumulated, transported more than 2 million standard containers just in a couple of years. Yeah? Basically 28 million tons of goods and over 11 million passengers with average occupancy rate of 95%. 95%. So can you imagine? Basically, it's extremely welcomed by the local residents and the local business people, and certainly by the local government. Another railway in Africa is the Addis Ababa Djibouti Railway, and this railway is longer than the Nairobi Mombasa Railway. It was something like 752 kilometers long, starting from Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, in the west, and it ends at the port of Djibouti, the capital city of Djibouti, also the port of Rossi port of Djibouti. And you possibly have known, and China actually has a naval base in Djibouti. And it connects the hinterland of Ethiopia. Actually, that is what we saw. It's a plateau, the plateau of East Africa, and to the Rossi port. It's the first freight dominant railway connecting the two countries on the African continent. It's the first standard gauge cross-border electrified railway in East Africa, and also a flagship project of China, Ethiopia, Djibouti Corporation under the BRI. And this railway officially started commercial operation not long after the Belt Road Initiative, the launch of the Belt Road. And I do not have the maps for you, but you can imagine, strategically located. And the railroad really played a very important role for the two countries and for the regions, and of course for China as well. And the third railway that must be mentioned is the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway. China defeated Japan in its bid for the railway construction. Japan certainly is famous for its so-called bulletin train. And China defeated Japan in a bid for the railway construction. And this railway connects Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, and Bandung, a very important historically important city of Bandung. And this is a flagship BRI project for China, and a proud railway of Indonesia, because this is the very first high-speed railway system in that country, and actually in Southeast Asia as well. It will be interesting to note at the very beginning, this railroad has been supported by the government. A memorandum of understanding was reached between the two governments, and later agreement was signed by the two state-owned companies of China and of Indonesia, and they established a joint venture company to build and operate the so-called high-speed rail system. And it was open to operation just I think just 2023, and it was officially put into use, and it has become a pride for local people. And again, another railway system I think is also worth mentioning. That is the China-Laos Railway. You possibly have a picture in your mind. Laos is basically a landlocked nation. Used to be a landlocked nation, and the China-Laos Railway is something like more than 1,000 kilometers long. It's an electrified railway that connects Kunming, Yunnan province of China, with the capital of the country, Vientiane of the country, Laos. It's constructed by China according to the national railway system. Basically, all the standard, all the equipments, all the softwares and hardwares actually is a copy of China's railway system. And it's also it's mainly invested and constructed by China, and even though jointly operated by both countries, but still directly connected with Chinese railway system, Chinese railway network. And this railway, Laos entered the railway transportation era and was transformed from a landlocked country into land-connected country. And for this country, this railway really played a very significant role. In 2024 alone, it carried basically 2 million tons of freight for a very least developed country of Asia. In terms of port construction, the first port I think we need to pay attention to is the port of Piraeus in Greece. And this port, you possibly have known, at that time, Greece was in crisis. It was in economic crisis and this port actually certainly did not go well. And we Chinese investment, particularly by the China state-owned enterprise, COSCO. COSCO certainly is one of the leading shipping companies in China, of course, in the world as well. And the Chinese company acquired 67% of the stake in the port of Piraeus Authority. And this certainly is a milestone for the Chinese companies in terms of its cooperation with the rest of the world. And now this port has become the top 40 ports and the #1 port in Greece, as well as in the Mediterranean region. And interestingly enough, this port actually is heated by the railway connection, the railway system that I just mentioned, the Europe-China railway system, or the China-EU Land-Sea Express line, and shortening the transportation time and the cost of transportation goods between China and Europe. That's understandable. But more interestingly, more noteworthy is that, and this port alone has become economic pillar for Greece. In 2021, for example, the added value of the port to the Greece economy was estimated to basically 0.8% of the country's GDP. And the port operator contributed 17.4 million euros in social security contributions and 27.6 million euros in taxes. And it also contributed to the employment. It accounted for basically 0.12% of total employment in Greece and provided income for more than 11,000 citizens. For Greece, the port is important period. Its contribution to the Greek economy, I think, is increasingly prominent. And the second port I think we need to pay attention to is the Gwadar port in Pakistan. You possibly have a picture in mind. This port actually lies into the Hormuz Straits. I don't know whether you have the picture. It's strategically located. The port has seen major progress and is marching into the goal of becoming a logistics center and industrial base. Even though this port has not been completed, but because of its strategic location and its role can be expected. Its role as a strategic standpoint can be expected. It basically connects it after it's to be completed. The hinterland of China, for example, Xinjiang region, particularly the Kashgar, will be closely connected to the port by the railway as well as by the highway system. So the port is really is designed as a part of the strategic plan. Another port I think is also worth mentioning, that is the so-called Jopio Deep Sea Port project in Myanmar. It stretches into the Indian Ocean. And geological exploration, environment, and social assessments are being conducted at this moment because of certain barriers that happened before such work were finally being undertaken. But given its strategic position, I think at this port, again, strategic role can be expected. Another port, which also is a strategic standpoint in the Indian Ocean, is the Hambantota. Don't know how to pronounce Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. It's becoming a growing logistics center in the Indian Ocean. Actually, after the port actually was designed as part of a huge development plan by a Chinese company, a state-owned enterprises. And it was originally the developed land or reclaimed land should become what is under the control of a Chinese state-owned enterprise for 99 years. But later, because of so-called environment impact assessment problem, it was suspended for a while. But nevertheless, it was reopened later. Hambantota Hambantota port in Sri Lanka is becoming one of the more important. And another port is the Italy port. It's called the Vado Gateway Terminal of Italy in South Italy. And it has become the first semi-automatic terminal operating Italy. And because Italy has withdrawn from the Belt and Road Initiative, I don't know what will be the future of the Vado Gateway. But nevertheless, it has already become the first semi-automatic terminal operated in this country. Another port is called the Lekki Deep Sea Port in Nigeria, and it's to be completed and it become major modern deep water port in Central Africa. In terms of air routes and airport construction, China has signed bilateral air transport agreements with 105 bright partner countries, open direct flights with 57 partner countries to facilitate cross-border transport. I noticed in Milan alone, at least three direct flights from China has been established from Beijing, from Chengdu, and from another city, and I forgot the name of the city. 3 direct flights has been established. More importantly, Chinese enterprises are active participants in civil aviation infrastructure cooperation with partner countries, including Pakistan, Nepal, and Togo. And over the Himalayan mountains, China helped build the airports in Nepal, helping to develop the local civil aviation industries, of course. In line with the infrastructure connectivity is the construction of economic corridors. And first, we find a China-Pakistan economic corridor. Highway, power plants, power grid, and the special economic zones are being constructed or have been constructed, have been completed. And they reach the stage of comprehensive development. And with this economic corridor, and China, Pakistan will be closely integrated. And I think this certainly will have a strategic important implication for the two countries and beyond. And when it comes to the new Eurasian land bridge, and we find a Hungary-Serbia railway are either completed or are on the way. Hungary-Serbia railway. And we also find a Western Europe, Western China highway completed. Can you imagine there is a highway that connects Western Europe and Western China? So this is what we call the new Eurasian land bridge. And when it comes to China Indochina Peninsula Economic Corridor, China southern countries bordering to the south, to China, south of China. China Laos Railway is part of it. Jakarta-Bandung Highway Speed is part of it. And China-Thai Railway is the contract for building the China-Thailand Railway has been signed. And also importantly, we find that China is helping Cambodia build a so-called canal connecting the hinterland of the country and the Gulf of Thailand. That is the port of Sihanouk. That is on the way, on the construction. And this certainly will have a very important impact. For example, the Mekong River. Those cargoes do not need to go down the Mekong River to the end of, let's say, Ho Chi Minh City. They can be channeled to Sihanouk port of Cambodia itself. So I think it's also very important for Cambodia and possibly also important for Vietnam. Again, we found the China-Mongolia-Russia economic corridor is being built. 2 bridges across the river, bordering river of Heilongjiang have been completed, connecting China and Russia. And more importantly, China-Russia Eastern natural gas pipeline have been fully operated, And so China's supply of gas has become a very important economic link between the 2 countries. Again, we find the China Central Asia, West Asia Economic Corridor. China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan highway has been fully operational. You know, tremendous difficulty have to be overcome before such highways can be operated. Can you imagine? Because of the geographical difficulties. And equally important, China and Uzbekistan has agreed to build a railway system, despite the opposition from Russia, because despite difficulty with the gauge, difference of the gauge, the railway gauge. Again, we find the China Central Asia gas pipelines has been also fully operational. What China needs, the gas that China needs can also be channeled from Central Asia to China. And as a prolongation of this pipeline, you possibly have known, the gas can be supplied to Beijing, to Shanghai as well. As a prolongation, as an extension of the gas line. The pipeline actually has been extended to Shanghai, to Beijing as well. And also we find the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar economic corridor. And we find the China-Myanmar crude oil and the gas pipeline has been completed, even though unnoticed. So the oil tanks and the gas tanks do not need to go through the straits, Malacca Straits. That is very busy and sometimes it's a little bit risky. So you don't need to go there because there's a pipeline from the Indian Ocean to the hinterland of China. Because the pipeline, because of this. That is an illustration of the infrastructure connectivity. So now, after a very lengthy elaboration of the infrastructure connectivity, let me ask myself a question, also ask you a question. What is behind the broad infrastructure connectivity? According to China, the BRI is a Chinese solution to global development issues, which aims to advance modernization in participating countries in tandem, make economic globalization more dynamic, inclusive, and sustainable, and ensure that more of the fruits will be shared more equitably by people across the world. In a world that is frequently connected and closely interdependent than any time in the past, humanity is a community of shared future in which every country's interests are inseparably intertwined. So this is a key concept of so-called community of shared future for mankind. And this actually is the, from my observation, is the ideological part of Belt and Road Initiative. China is a major developing country, and it keeps in mind the future and the common interest of humanity. So it has therefore proposed to build a global community of shared future with the goal of creating an open, inclusive, clean, and a beautiful world that enjoys lasting peace, universal security, and a common prosperity. charting a bright future for human development. That is the Chinese ideology behind the Belt Road Initiative. And from the perspective of China, the ultimate goal of BRI is to help build a global community shared future. And the important public good for improving global governance. The initiative provides a platform for turning the vision into reality. The BRI involves countries in different regions at different development stages and with different cultures. It transcends differences in ideologies and social systems. So BRI participating nations are now classified by ideologies, by the social systems. It's open to any countries or whatever system or whatever ideology they have. The BRI enables different countries to share opportunities, realize common development, prosperity, and build a community of shared interest, responsibility, and destiny characterized by mutual political trust, economic integration, and cultural inclusiveness. As a practical means of building a global community of shared future, the BRI has created a new understanding and inspired imagination of the world and contributed new ideas and new approaches to international exchanges. And you certainly know the ideology sometimes, or the universal values sometimes are very important when you are hurting something. The US under Donald Trump's administration has certainly discarded all the so-called values. And the Chinese values a global community of shared future possibly can be, can be dear to some people. It will produce a fairer and more equitable global governance system and take the humanity to a better future. So after repetition of the Chinese interpretation of the ideology behind the BRI, infrastructure connectivity, I would like to say the BRI infrastructure connectivity paves the way towards shared development and prosperity. The BRI is in alignment with the concept of global community for shared future. It promotes and puts into action ideas that are relevant to present era. Can you imagine the Himalaya hinterland possibly will never be developed without the BRI? Now, actually, you can find the highway and the railway are being built and even have been built. So the local people will be exposed to the development in general. The world development, security, openness, cooperation, civilization, and the governance. It provides not only a conceptual framework, but also a practical roadmap for all nations to achieve development, to achieve prosperity. And the BRI is founded on the principle of so-called extensive consultation, joint contribution, shared benefits. It's important. I said the top ideology is so-called shared future of the mankind, community of shared future of the mankind. And at certain level is the so-called extensive consultation, joint contribution, and shared benefits. We can call the principle. At the principle level, that is what China proposed. It's always related to Belt Road. It advocates win-win cooperation in pursuit of greater good and shared interest. It emphasizes all countries are equal participants, contributors, and beneficiaries as well. And it encourages economic integration, interconnected development, and the sharing of the achievements. This principle highlights the BRI is not only one of the China's international aid programs or geopolitical tool, but a collaborative effort for shared development. So when it reverts back to the so-called infrastructure connectivity, it's not only a China's investment or China's international aid program. Actually, it's a collaborative effort among all the countries involved for shared development. So the goals are to be developed a new model of cooperation based on win outcomes, shared responsibility, and a collective participation. Build a global network for partnerships and nurture a harmonious coexistence for humanity. In official statement, BRI summits, which convene every other year, the participating communities firmly opposed to protectionism, unilateralism, and hegemonism, working together to create an all-round three-dimensional landscape of interconnectivity. And this is what has been announced by the summit. Then a question naturally arises. Is the BRI free from geopolitical calculations? I don't know, but indeed, it does not create an exclusive club. It does not form cliques based on specific ideological standards. It does not establish military alliances. Even though I just mentioned that there's a naval base, a small naval base in Djibouti, but actually that is only one. That is only one. And originally it was intended to provide logistic support for the Chinese fleet that patrols the Red Sea for naval for navigational security, because there is you possibly know there are so-called pirates are very active in that area. So we have a fleet in the Red Sea, and the naval base, small naval base, is intended to support the logistic support. But maybe there is inevitably there's a geopolitical implication, but nevertheless, it does not create an exclusive club. It does not establish a military alliance. That's why China said the BRI is committed to open cooperation towards inclusive and sustainable development. Now, again, at this moment, another question arises. Is the BRI free from criticism? At this moment, I think it's time to introduce the US perspective, US evaluation. According to the US, China engages in debt trap diplomacy, and the BRI has created a debt trap in host countries where China invests. The US believes that the BRI goes far beyond the scope of infrastructure construction, and that it's a political advantage by making countries along the BRI incur debts through opaque financial transparency. That has been said, but we can find the US accusation lacks serious evidence support. So it can basically be said that's a biased attack. Of course, this alarm China from time to time forgive debts for African countries, while the latter, up to now, have held an increasing welcoming attitude towards Chinese investment and engagement. So that maybe the US accusation possibly can stand only at this point. There are certain Chinese companies that have engagement in Belt and Road countries are suffering because of certain engagement possibly have already gone beyond their capacity. But as a whole, this country has never explored the so-called DARE system to its own benefits. And from time to time forgives the debts for African countries. And you possibly know every other year, a so-called a China-African Cooperation Forum is held in Beijing or in Africa. And whenever such a conference of summit is happening, and you can find a so-called their forgiveness. But enough. So I do not believe that accusation had a serious support. And the U.S. also accuses China of lack of transparency in the bribe. The U.S. even acted to press the International Monetary Fund's annual meeting to do more to improve the transparency of China's infrastructure lending. Maybe anecdote can be added at this moment. China's Development Bank, National State Development Bank, as well as other banks like Export Import Credit Bank and so on and so forth, including the Silk Road funds, actually lends more money than the World Bank. Can you imagine that? But that is true. A letter from 16 U.S. senators even called IMF to intervene in the bribe. Of course, it raises issue of transparency, but I do believe this is not a question, but this is a business secret. Indeed, China does not in any agreement, any MOU, China certainly would not allow the other party to disclose information to the public. But I think that is possibly about a business secret. I don't know. That's a mentality, possibly. The U.S. also accuses bribe of breeding corruption. Unlike Western countries, which unitarily oppose good governance requirements in relevant collaborative agreements with developing countries, especially Asian and African countries, China does not set any preconditions for loans and aid cooperation related to bribe because of its respect for the sovereignty of other countries and the principle of non-interference in internal affairs. That has been a long-standing practice not to impose any conditions upon a collaboration between China and the other country. I do not think governance certainly is important. Good governance certainly is very important. But I don't know whether imposing a good governance requirement is appropriate in such a scenario of collaboration. The U.S. also accuses bribe of polluting environment, making the bribe country the polluting heaven. But I think we need to introduce the so-called neutral assessment. A study using data from 130 countries examined the bribe's environmental impact through carbon emissions as an indicator of degradation. Results suggest the bribe may exacerbate environmental degradation, but this is not, this basically reminds a country of the risk, the environmental risk, but it's not a clear-cut conclusion that China's bribe has contributed to the environmental degradation. Nevertheless, the country quickly responded by stopping construction of any coal power plant in Brian. At the very beginning, many developing countries would like to see China help build a coal-fired power plant. But later, when it realized the possible environmental risk, the country has responded by stopping the construction of any coal power plant in bright countries, and has seriously engaged in environmental impact assessment as per local environmental regulation before starting any infrastructural projects. And this country has already drawn two lessons from the Sri Lanka port development project and the Jodhpur port in Myanmar. And the two ports were suspended. The construction of the port was suspended due to the environmental impact assessment, for birth. At the beginning, local governments were so eager to introduce such a project. So therefore, not enough attention has been paid. But after the problem arose and the Chinese companies engaged in this project actually have seriously engaging in environmental impact assessments in accordance with local environmental regulation. Of course, from my point of view, the research is further needed to explore the relationship among ecological footprint, China's investment, and the economic development to test the pollution heaven hypothesis. The US basically has proposed a pollution heaven hypothesis. That is, Chinese companies might migrate the pollution industries to bright countries, but that possibly does not have substantial evidence. But nevertheless, research is further needed to explore such relations. From my point of view, that is also the general result of neutral perspective, neutral assessment. China needs to pay attention to the investment's risk. Chinese enterprises, even though most of them are state-owned enterprises, face multiple risks in investment, particularly power sector investment. So they need to know the possible social and environmental impact. And they also need to know whether such projects are financially solid. They also need to know whether the project will be protected at the local level. So careful risk assessment and management are essential for them. Not only for them, actually, but also for the host countries. Chinese companies need also to pay attention to the employment effects, to the social impacts. Fortunately enough, certain Chinese companies, the forerunner of the Belt Road engagement, forerunner of the Chinese companies in this regard are some of the digital companies. Actually, they are disseminating information, they're disseminating the technologies, and they also have the benign employment impact in bright countries. And that will contribute to the development opportunities in these countries. So after saying that, I do believe the achievement, the 12 years of Brian has indeed achieved a lot in terms of infrastructure connectivity. And by nature, the infrastructure connectivity will offer a perfect explanation of China's solution to global economic governance, while contributing to local economy, to the growth of the local economy, to social development as well. On the Chinese side, we're excited about infrastructure connectivity, the shining infrastructure connectivity and the corresponding economic growth. The broad impact on participating countries are by nature multifaceted, encompassing economic growth drivers, as well as environmental and social risks. Evaluation must comprehensively take these factors into consideration. Measures need to be taken to leverage benefits and mitigate risk for sustainable development for the local countries, for the BRIC countries, as well as for the participating stakeholders of BRIC at a domestic level. That comes to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks indeed to Professor Kong for this fascinating overview. And I think we still have 15 minutes for debate. So if you have questions, comments, please. I'm very happy to come and gather the comments and questions and then to give the last say to Professor Kong before opening the next panel. But I do have, yes, Imad, please come here because we are recording and otherwise people won't be able to hear you.
Morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for this presentation. So I have a couple of questions, basically. The first one is, I mean, you essentially made an overview of BRI's present and its projects all over the world, different places. I have a simple question here. Is it effective? From a soft law perspective. Second question.
Effective.
Yes, because we've seen all these projects and how there are different places, Southeast Asia, Africa, even Latin America and our world. What's the effectiveness rate of these projects from a Chinese perspective? That's the first one.
Actually, China's experience.
Why don't we get all the questions first?
It's up to you. I don't know whether I can remember all the questions.
Second question.
Okay.
All right. Second question. Sorry, let me get closer. Which, according to you, are the most true legal principles being used in the diffusion of BRI all over the world?
Legal principles.
But Chinese, using like sort of Chinese Confucius character and try to diffuse it globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, let me thank you very much for the questions. Actually, China's practice of pursuing the BRI actually is strongly connected with domestic experience. In China, we have a saying: in order to get rich, you have to build infrastructures. You have to build a road. You have to get connected. And the 40 years of development domestically possibly have already answered the question. That's why we pay too much attention to the infrastructure connectivity. And I believe this, at the end of the day, will contribute to economic development. So you need to have possibly a little bit forward-looking attitude towards the BRI, effectiveness of BRI. So that's the first question. Second question is about the legal principles. And I said at the top of the BRI is the so-called community of the shared future of the mankind. Or sometimes we saw the building the community of the shared future for the mankind. And at the principle level, I also said that is the so-called extensive consultation, joint efforts, and shared benefits. I do believe China itself is following this principle while pursuing the bright, you know, at at international level, and sometimes even sacrifice its own benefits to build a project. You never know at what year you will, at the end of the day, you will reap the benefits, you will get the return. But actually they are doing this and that. And when it comes, when certain countries are, I don't know, are requesting for forgiveness, for their forgiveness, China will often react positively. So I do believe that's a traditional, it's a hugely, heavily influenced by the traditional Chinese Confucius Confucius attitude. So we are try to be nice to others, or try to be, 仁者爱人 really means a wise person shall share its love with others. Basically, it can be translated like this. And a wise person should share its love, because at the end of the day, not only your neighbors, those will benefit, but you also benefit at the end of the day, because we are so closely intertwined. Yeah? So I do believe that is a legal principle that China itself is practicing. And it's, of course, it's promoting it very rigorously. When in a world that the values, are diminished, the role of values are diminished, particularly because of Donald Trump's, I think these values is still very, how can I say, it's something that we shall admire. The principle, I think, is really something that has its, universal values, has its universal, at least in certain countries, it's something that we need to pay attention to, that we need to even follow, and we need to be affected. So that is what I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. The questions, comments, I do have some comments. I really enjoyed also the last part of the presentation in which you referred to the critiques that have been directed to the initiative, but would like to know, I mean, a bit more about the legal issue, because I imagine that it might be very difficult, I mean, to coordinate different national systems, and I guess there are issues concerning environmental law, labor law that are in a way that belong to the national competence. So I don't know if you have some anecdotes or some examples of questions related to the lack of coordination between the Chinese and the other partner legal systems, and if you tell us how these were solved. Second question, I'm curious about the impact of the pandemic over the Belt and Road Initiative. I guess that all the operations were stuck, I mean, during especially the most difficult period of the pandemic. So how did you reactivate the project after that? So I'm curious in general to know what do you think about the legal challenges that in this first 12 years have emerged, and how we could solve them, how we could fix these issues. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is a very important question, and this is often asked question. The BRI is not characterized by institution building. Is not characterized by institutional building. And you can see most of the so-called more than 150 agreements or MOUs are not necessarily legal binding agreements. And they do not necessarily adopt the approach of free trade agreements Instead, they will prefer so-called MOU, which often of which flexibility can be found. And I do believe that possibly is embedded in Chinese traditional mentality, trust in others. You shall trust others, and instead you will be paid at the end of the day. And for example, you asked me to present a case. I would only like to mention the Sri Lanka case. I said at the very beginning, an agreement was reached between the Chinese state-owned enterprise and the local governments. And it said, basically said, reclaim the land across the shore, will be maintained, but will be to the benefit, accrue to the benefit of the Chinese companies for 99 years. But later, this agreement was reached before a former government of Sri Lanka. After the election, a new government came into power. The government uses the so-called environmental impact assessment as possibly as an excuse or as a reason, and so that this project was suspended by local governments. But at the end of the day, the Chinese company did not resort to arbitration, under which the agreement of China and Sri Lanka foreign investor are entitled to challenge the host government's activities like this. Instead, a very comprehensive engagement of discussion was held, and Chinese companies readjusted its contribution, including the investment, impact assessment, investment, and other. On the other hand, it also says we do not want to have a huge to maintain the existing agreement regarding the land reclaiming, the right to reclaim the land, something like this. Yeah, we can shorten, basically we can reduce our rights that are specified under the agreement. So after such a engagement of discussions, so the project was restarted, and I think it's really benefiting. Actually, it's really generating the benefits for the local community. Of course, the company at this moment might incur certain damages, but at the end of the day, they can also get what they are entitled to, or at least substantially, not necessary as a whole. So I think that possibly is a Chinese approach to this kind of stuff. They prefer, mutual discussion, because they think any dispute can be solved as long as we are accommodating to each other. If you are accommodating to me and I'm about to accommodating to you, at the end of the day, we can reach an agreement. And that's why this country attached too much importance to negotiate the solution. And it does not want to, judicize the approach. Of course, this is just part of it. The key issue is that as long as we are going towards each other, we can find a solution. Don't be afraid. Don't stick to those agreements, what the agreements have specified. We can, at the end of the day, we can work together because our interests are so closely related. Of course, you will say that is not a legal approach. We just do not want to have such an approach. We want to have a clearly defined rights and how, in terms of breach on the other, we know what our rights are. Yeah, maybe that might be a solution, but that solution in this world, when conflicting interests occur, possibly you will find a real conflict, true conflict, even beyond interest, a true conflict. And this conflict may end in war. You never know what would happen. So I believe the China approach really has its own advantage. So institutional arrangement are often imbued with flexibility and with I don't know how to say. Well, on the one hand, China possibly is often the part that would like to sacrifice its immediate interest because it thinks at the end of the day I can still get something, at least a proportion, a very big proportion of what is entitled to me. So I think that possibly is the approach that we can find in how China approaches the Belt Road, to the legal challenges related.
Thanks indeed. Okay, I don't think there are other questions or comments. Ah, no, yes, Tekunao, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Kong, for the excellent presentation. Just a quick questions about, so there are different concerns from the West, from the Europe, about the Belt and Road Initiative, and one of them recently is the overcapacity, claiming that China is using industrial subsidies to support the domestic industries and flood the cheap or low manufacturers goods to the Europe. So what do you think, how can China possibly respond to this kind of concern? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Overcapacity issue itself is actually a very, very sarcastic. Why did I say that? Because if we strictly stick to the economic principle, we certainly know overcapacity is a result of marketplace. Because if supply and the demand side actually at the end of the day will result in sometimes overcapacity, sometimes maybe a shortage of supply. That is basically driven by the market rule. But on the other hand, such issue, if an issue occurs, one party sees it as an issue, the issue has to be solved. But the problem is, the key is that we do not need to blame the other of reading overcapacity. Actually, you do not have the some evidence to prove. Instead, this is a market rule, the result of market rule. Possibly you can say this issue we need to find. This is issue you need to admit. But this issue possibly is not your fault. But we need to find a way to settle it. At this moment, I do believe such an issue, we can find a way to settle the so-called issue. So the right approach for example, for Europe or for other countries, possibly is not at the first sight to blame the other. You guys are bad, so you're making an overcapacity. Because you need to remember, overcapacity issue is not an economically solid issue. That is a market, the action, the result of the market rule. So, but nevertheless, we need to find it. We do not want so many Chinese goods pouring into this market. Then we can find a solution. You can, let's say, China possibly can commit, we can reduce the supply, or we can, to some extent, we can mutually find a way. With the wisdom of the two sides, I do believe we can find a solution to overcapacity. And we also need to bear in mind so-called overcapacity. Actually, from the consumer's point of view, that's also beneficial. From the industrial side, that might be an issue. But nevertheless, blaming itself is not the right approach. But instead, a right compromise issue can, at the end of the day, can find. We we must and we can find such a solution to overcapacity. Yeah, if this is a real issue, when the two people sitting on the table at a table, they can find such a way. Yeah, and I just mentioned. I just want to cite an example of the so-called the solar panels or even the electric cars. Now the electric car issue has diminished. Nobody say overcapacity is there because of what? Because the two parties were sitting down and they find a certain interest must be safeguarded. And China, on the other hand, make a substantial compromise. And this way, by this way, this issue is no longer remaining an issue. Huh? If I can stand like this, yeah.
Thanks indeed. Well, I think it's time to move to the first panel, but thanks so much. Join me in giving a big applause to Professor Kong. Thanks so much for this very rich presentation and for the discussion as well. And now I invite the chair and the speakers of the next panel to join the stage. In the meantime, I will download the presentation of Imad, who is also one of the speakers. We pause for that's where you are. Okay. Use the mic. Don't forget the mic.
Do you have the slides? Do you have the remote?
No, you can the wise.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone. Once again, thank you very much to the organizers for this kind invitation. I'm always very happy to be here to join the Scuola Sant'Anna di Pisa. Now, the panel and the topic we are going to talk about is the relationship between international law and China, and in particular the question of to what extent the BRI had an impact on this kind of relationship. In detail, from this perspective, there are a variety of questions to be dealt with. First of all, China's position towards established international norms and institutions. Secondly, whether this initiative, BRI, may be regarded as a vehicle for norm making, and last but not least, the role of private international law as to the cross-border relationships this kind of projects may involve. In brief, taken together, these presentations are supposed to explore the evolving interaction between the BRI and international law, both in its public and private dimensions. Now, let me introduce our first speaker, Pierfrancesco Rossi. Pier is a professor of public international law at the University of Teramo, and he will present a paper titled China in International Law under the BRI, Norm-Taking, Norm-Making, or something else. Pierre, the floor is yours, and please, you have 20 minutes at your disposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fulvio. Thank you so much to the organizers of this conference, Giuseppe, Xueyan, for your kind invitation. Also for me, it's always a pleasure to be in Pisa, and this time it was particularly a pleasure because it gave me a chance to retrace some old ideas on my old ideas on China's engagement with international law, which is a subject that I studied quite extensively back when I was a PhD student. It's been some time, but now I had the chance to measure those ideas with the latest developments of the Belt and Road Initiative. So thank you for that. Also, I'm a former student of the Confucius Institute, so that's a great pleasure. So to start my presentation, I want to tell you what happened to me 5 days ago. I was browsing the internet. I was looking for some updates on the Belt and Road Initiative, and I saw a headline on Al Jazeera's website. And the headline read, I quote, China sets up international body in Hong Kong to rival World Court. The World Court being, of course, the International Court of Justice. So I was immediately hooked. I clicked, expecting to find some world-changing news about this China setting up an anti-ICJ in Hong Kong. But alas, the reality was disappointing, if that was the expectation. So what actually happened on 30 May in Hong Kong was the signing of a treaty which established a brand new institution called the International Organization for Mediation. 33 signatories, China being one of them, of course, and 32 countries all involved in the Belt and Road Initiative. So as the name suggests, the scope of this new institution is to contribute to resolving international disputes through mediation, all types of international disputes, so interstate, investor-state disputes, and also commercial disputes between private parties. So despite the headline, it is actually more similar to the Permanent Court of Arbitration than it is to the ICJ, as it's clear, but with a focus on consensual, non-binding outcomes. I was curious, of course, about the headline, and apparently it turns out that the headline was due to an incautious declaration made by Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee-Ka-chiu, who declared that the new institution would be on par with the ICJ, which I guess is a bit of an overstatement. But I believe that the way in which this news was reported in the media is revealing of a very widespread narrative on China's engagement with international law and the role that the BRI is playing in this engagement. So according to this view, essentially the BRI would mark a shift in China's role in the international legal order from being primarily a norm taker to being more of a norm maker. So in other words, China would be assuming a more proactive stance in the development of international legal norms. Now, this idea is, of course, expressed in many different ways, so you will forgive me for some oversimplification. But for the sake of my argument and for simplicity, I will call this the mainstream view. It's not only mainstream in the West. I've also read many Chinese scholars saying more or less the same thing. Now, of course, when this view is articulated, it's not simply about China making treaties or contributing to customary international law through its state practice, because China already does all these things just like any other state. The claim of this mainstream view is something more ambitious, of course. That is that China, through initiatives like the BRI, is seeking to reshape international law at a structural level. To redefine its underlying principles, to create brand new institutions, etc. And for this reason, it's not surprising that this mainstream view is presented, especially in the West, frequently with a sense of fear. I have read comments describing the BRI as a Trojan horse through which China wants to rewrite the rules of the global order, something that I guess is very close to the US position that Professor Kong was describing. So, of course, the story of China creating an anti-ICJ in Hong Kong resonated with this view. So that's why, the headline was catchy. Now, my presentation is about this mainstream view. And to be clear from the outset, my argument is not that this mainstream view is completely wrong. There is certainly some truth to the idea that China is becoming more proactive in international lawmaking, especially in the field of, especially when it comes to sponsoring the creation of new institutions. And the one on mediation is, of course, just one example among many others. But I won't be focusing today on norm making because that will be the subject of the next presentation. What I want to argue instead is that this mainstream view is at least a bit simplistic, because the effects of the BRI on China's engagement with international law cannot be measured just by looking at whether or not China is making new rules. And this argument breaks down into two main points. The first one is that since the BRI was launched in 2013, China's participation in existing legal regimes has increased. And the second point is that the transformative potential of the BRI from the standpoint of international law might have more to do with values than with norms. Hence the title of my presentation, which is norm taking, norm making, or something else. Now I can reveal that this something else, at least in my mind, has to do with values, and more specifically, the internationalization of Chinese domestic values and China's particular conception of the law. So I'll start from the first point. Now, there is compelling evidence that since 2013, China has been increasing its engagement with international legal regimes, especially but not exclusively, as we will see, in the area of international economic law and institutions. Now, China often seems less inclined to change those regimes than other actors, such as the US and the EU. So in a way, the BRI might have made China even more of a norm taker, if we want to stick to that label. So there's one area where this is very clear, and that is investment arbitration. Now, China has been for many decades, of course, a key player in international investment law. It ranks second after Germany in terms of international investment agreements it has concluded. It has 109 BITs in force, and also a number of treaties with investment provisions, 16 of which have been concluded since the launch of the BRI. And all this is not a novelty, because the majority of the BITs of China were concluded before the 2000s or in the 2000s. It was a time when China was receiving an increasing inflow of foreign investment. But throughout that time, there was a mismatch between China's participation in investment agreements and its participation in investor-state dispute settlement, or investor arbitration, if you prefer. Because in fact, China's earlier BITs, the first generation, as they call it, did not even mention arbitration or limited it to compensation to the amount of compensation for expropriation. And the obvious reason behind this caution was that China expected to be involved in disputes only as a respondent state, so it was not very keen on being sued. But that attitude changed when China became a capital exporting country, of course. And the new generation of Chinese BITs makes regular reference to exit arbitration. And what's currently happening is that the mismatch that I just mentioned is clearly closing down. So to give you some numbers, until 2013, there had been only 3 arbitrations initiated by Chinese investors against foreign states. Today, the number is 20. And we had 4 in 2021, 4 in 22, and 3 between 23 and 24. And these are only the known arbitrations, of course. And China has also been involved in 9 cases as a respondent state, only one of which preceded the Belt and Road Initiative. All the others have come after 2014. Now, these numbers are not exceptional per se, because if you compare them to the total number of ISDS cases, which is around 1,400, that's not super significant, but they show a trend. Okay? These numbers show a clear trend that China's engagement with investment arbitration is arguably normalizing, in the sense that it is coming to reflect China's position in international investment law. And this is confirmed by China's position on the debate on ISDS reform that is going on in UNCITRAL's working group number 3. So there was this proposal in July 2019 by China, where China articulated several proposals for reforming ISDS. The main one is the establishment of an appellate mechanism. But at the same time, China is less critical of ISDS than other actors, especially the European Union. Because, for instance, China has always opposed the establishment of a multilateral investment court. China is arguing that the ability of the parties to appoint arbitrators on first instance should be preserved. So clearly, this is much less disruptive of the existing international regime than the approach of other states. Now, obviously, China's approach to ISDS, China supports a version of ISDS which is clearly that clearly resembles the WTO dispute settlement system. And this is not surprising, given that the WTO has been for many years the blueprint of China's successful engagement with international legal regimes. Now, also here, some commentators have argued that the BRI poses a challenge to the WTO, especially because of the growing number of regional or bilateral FTAs or other treaties that China is developing supposedly as an alternative to the WTO in this view. If we look at the evidence, however, there is little indication that China is dissatisfied with the WTO system. Like if we only look at the dispute settlement system, China has acted as a complainant in 30 WTO disputes. The two most recent cases relate to the Trump era tariffs, of course. It has been responded in 53 cases. It has submitted third-party briefs in 198 cases, which is the third highest number after the EU and Japan. And of course, it has joined the EU and other members in establishing the multi-party interim appeal arbitration arrangement, which of course is encountering many difficulties, but it's an attempt to respond to the paralysis of the appellate body. So here again, China appears to be less disruptive of the existing regime than other states, well, in this case, at least the United States. And the same pattern can be observed elsewhere. Another clear example, international financial institutions. Now, China sponsored the creation of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is basically modeled on the World Bank, but based in Beijing. And this bank has more than 100 member states, including a significant number of Western states. And again, the AIIB has been described as a potential rival or perhaps a replacement of the World Bank. If we look at the practice, the relationship between the two institutions is clearly one of collaboration and not a competition. In 2016, the AIIB signed a memorandum of understanding with many other institutions, including the World Bank, and most of its projects are co-financed with other financial institutions. So, a pattern of increased participation in established international law. This is not limited to the economic realm. For instance, I read a paper by Professor Xueyan, who rightly noted that China's recent adoption of restrictive state immunity, after being the last bastion of absolute state immunity until last year, well, this might have more than something to do with the Belt and Road Initiative. And this makes a lot of sense for two reasons. Well, first, obviously, because Chinese firms will now be able to sue foreign governments with which they have concluded contracts before Chinese courts when other jurisdictional requirements are met. And secondly, less obviously, but I believe more importantly, Chinese firms will now be able to take enforcement action against assets of foreign states in China. And this will be very relevant when it comes to enforcing international arbitration awards. And I believe that it's worth asking if this increased participation in international legal regimes, including dispute settlement, might be producing some spillover effects into other areas of international law that are not directly related to the BRI. One example, China's engagement with the ICJ is clearly on the rise. Now, of course, to my knowledge, China has never consented to contentious jurisdiction of the ICJ. Okay, but if we look at the advisory proceedings of the ICJ, the picture is quite different. Now, interestingly, the first time China participated in oral proceedings before the ICJ was in 2009 in the Kosovo case. For 15 years, that remained an isolated incident. But in 2024 alone, China presented oral statements in 2 advisory proceedings, the one on the occupied Palestinian territory and the one on climate change. And just 1 month ago, on 2 May, China again appeared before the court in the proceedings concerning the activities of the United Nations and other organizations in Palestine. It's not just a change in numbers, it's also a change in the quality of engagement, because the written statements of China in the Kosovo case were 6 pages long. While recently China's engagement with these 3 cases has been way more detailed and refined from a legal point of view. And it is notable that China has always argued in favor of the court's jurisdiction in these last 3 cases. So the pattern, I believe, is quite clear. Now I can come to the second point of my presentation, which will be much shorter: the transformative potential of the BRI may not be just about norm making, because I don't believe that is the main part of the BRI, but perhaps about something else, which is values. And let me explain what I mean here. Now, a global initiative of this scale, of course, has the potential to influence the international legal order, not simply by creating new rules, but also by diffusing some normative or value models. Now, the BRI is not simply an infrastructure plan. It is a reflection of a set of values. Which values? Well, the same values that have guided China's economic rise in the last decades. And this was mentioned before by Professor Kong. So to explain this point, we should recall that it is absolutely uncontroversial that the BRI is an external projection of China's model of domestic economic development based on infrastructure, etc. But if this is true, then it's also reasonable to assume that the initiative projects not just Chinese economic values, but also other Chinese domestic values. President Xi Jinping himself described the BRI as, I quote, a new round of reform and opening up. So nothing less than a new phase of the reform process that started in the late 70s in China. And this lens, I believe, offers a more accurate framework for understanding the form of international governance that the BRI presupposes. Take, for instance, the main feature of the BRI, the one that we have already mentioned several times. The fact that the initiative is largely political and it prefers soft law over hard law. Now, this is entirely consistent with the key aspect of Chinese legal philosophy, which is the primacy of politics over law, which is a concept that originates in Marxist thought and sees the law as a tool to achieve political and economic objectives. And in this context, it is interesting that China presents the rule of law as a central theme of the initiative. Now, the term rule of law has become part of China's vocabulary, both domestically and internationally. But correct me if I'm wrong, there is some controversy over the more accurate translation of the corresponding Chinese term, 法治. It could be translated as rule of law, law as constraint on power, or rule by law, law as a tool of power, supporting economic development and social order. And an international legal order where politics drives the law and not the other way around is entirely consistent with the second understanding of 法治, that is, rule by law. And we can see many other ways in which China's domestic legal thinking affects the BRI. So, flexibility. This reflects the experimentation that has characterized China's domestic model, pragmatism over ideology. New dispute resolution bodies, well, they prefer mediation over arbitration. This is an influence of Confucian traditions that prefer amicable settlement over confrontation. And finally, economic development first. And this is nothing else than China's approach to human rights. In line with its Marxist roots, China prioritizes the right to development and other economic rights over civil and political rights. So to summarize, and I close my presentation. So we can witness 2 dynamics in tension here. On the one hand, China projects its domestic values internationally. On the other hand, it is also increasingly participating in established international institutions and legal regimes. Now, whether or not these dynamics will ultimately lead to some changes in the international legal order is, of course, an open question that I cannot answer. But one thing is for sure, the story is a bit more complicated than China creating its own ICJ in Hong Kong. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for this inspiring presentation. Now let's move to the second speaker, Imad Antoine Ibrahim. Imad is a professor at the University of Twente, and his presentation will regard BRAI as a not novel approach to international law making. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to upload the presentation there.
Ah.
Thanks, Giuseppe. That's fine. Ask for it specifically, yes. Something happened. Yes. Beginner, please. Let's see if this works. Okay, it works. Right. So I'm just gonna stand a bit because that makes life easier. Yeah, but closer to the mic. Yeah, I'm just gonna. Morning, everyone. This is gonna be a little bit provocative presentation here about the BRI. The idea, I try to understand how the Belt and Road Initiative is being established or being implemented in a specific region, in this case, the Arab world, the MENA region. And I compared it with US and EU presence there. And based on specific data and specific analysis and literature, I came up with the idea that is, well, it's the same thing, basically. The three main parties are doing the same thing. So in a way, it's starting from soft law and trying to use it to get to a hard law situation, which is why it triggered me to say the new approach is not novel. It's the same thing as the EU and the US is doing, or we're doing. So let's start from the beginning. What are China's mechanisms when it comes to the BRI? You have the soft mechanisms, the flexibility being used. How is that being used in the MENA region? This is what I just said, essentially. We start with that. What are the characteristics of BRI? A soft, flexible legal infrastructure. There's no set of one unified legal framework for the BRI. China is trying to get legitimacy with other international organizations like the UN. All of this, with the idea of basically or essentially having more legitimate legal framework or developing overall the road legitimate legal framework for BRI. To that end, we have a mix of instruments being used as well. Hence, what I want you to do is to start thinking. And before I get to the EU and US counterparts, do you see this sort of ideas being tracked elsewhere? Do the EU and US adopt similar instruments? Do you have examples of same ideas being adopted elsewhere? This is where things start. So what are the main legal instruments being used within the BRI? There are the MOUs, there are strategic partnerships, there are white papers, there are other documents, there are legal forums, there are arbitrations. And sometimes you have domestic legislations with extraterritorial effect. You could already think, for instance, of the new European directive on CSDDD concerning due diligence. Similar ideas. You have US domestic laws that also have extraterritorial effects. US and Europe also have strategic partnerships, which we will see later on. So in terms of instruments, almost they are the same. You could say there are some sort of novelties within the Chinese one, having Chinese characteristics, but each party has the same sort of ideas and strategies. So let's see whether that is the case, having the MENA region as a case study. Why the MENA region? It's mainly due to the astronomical amount of investments being made by China, especially in the Gulf with the Gulf Cooperation Council. We're talking about multi-million-dollar of agreements, which also stands true if you want to consider the latest visit of Trump to the region, gathering around $1.4, $1.5 trillion of investments and of money, basically being in terms of weapons and other terms of deals. What will we see? What will happen there? We will see. So how is China trying to influence legally the MENA region through its BRI? Well, there are several sets of mechanisms. The first one is the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence of Yu Jintao. One of them is equality. The second one is respect for territorial sovereignty. So these are the legal basis in terms of soft law instruments for the relation between China and the MENA region. The second one is the 4 principles of Yu Jintao for existence, peaceful coexistence. There is also the Arab Policy Forum between China and the MENA region. And there's different specific modes of cooperation. They call it 1 + 2 + 3. So you have energy, infrastructure, and trade. And add to that right now, technology. So these are soft mechanisms being used at this stage when China deals with the Arab world using BRI as a soft law mechanism. Now, these were theoretical ideas. Now we have something more in practice. So you have these, for instance, the 5 principles. Okay, you have the 5 principles. This creates sort of cooperation, collaboration. How does that happen in practice? First thing, you have the dialogues, the multilateral dialogues. The main one is the China-Arab State Forum. There are other forums. There are also sometimes forums where specific Arab countries exist. For instance, the China-Africa Cooperation Forum. Not all Arab countries are there, but some of them are there. You have the China-GCC forums as well. Now, you have strategic partnerships that have been signed between China and specific countries. These include, I think at this stage, around 18 countries. Mainly, there's Qatar, UAE, there's Morocco, there's Lebanon, there's Egypt. The main strategic partnerships are, as you could imagine, with either the GCC countries or with big countries like Egypt. Then you have the bilateral agreements and MOUs that are signed with specific cities. There is MOUs and bilateral agreements signed between specific Chinese companies and the city of Dubai when it comes to specific investments in gas or specific tech. And finally, the Chinese government tries to align the BRI with national visions. You have Saudi National Visions 2030. You have Qatar National Vision 2030. Same thing for UAE. Hence, if we go back for a second, you have theoretical approach. These are the legal basis theoretically. Let's say 5 principles coexistence. These are the rules for collaboration with BRI. But then this is how this happens in practice. I want you to take a minute and think about it. And where have you seen this before? Do the US and Europe have same ideas in terms, let's first create some theoretical legal basis for cooperation with the Arab world or other areas, and then we try to use more or less practical instruments? I could already think about EU in terms of principles, European values of non-discrimination and protection for human rights, for instance. Now, what was the outcome of using this model via BRI on the MENA region? There were pros and cons. The first pro is the flexibility. Due to this soft power approach, soft law approach, governments and from both sides and companies could be flexible in the way they introduce their ideas and collaborate. And that also led to sort of legal pluralism, where each legal system's ideas were respected, and there was some sort of, I would use the word of incorporation of specific values here and there from each legal system, as long as there was mutual respect for sovereignty, cooperation, equality. And that led to a growth in infrastructure development, because the more, the kind of, if you know the rules and the sets of things that you could do, that creates a situation where you could actually make investments and let things grow. Based on which we have new forms of dispute resolution being introduced to solve their problems, considering the flexibility element. So from that perspective, we have plenty of positive points or positive issues or impact of BRI on the region. That said, we also have negative points. There is a sort of legal potential risk of legal inconsistency, given the difference in the laws, also values between systems. Then how do you enforce these whatever flexible or soft law instruments, especially in a region that is known by weak enforcement of rules, rule of law that's being questioned, especially when it comes to labor rights, environmental rights, the issues of IP concerns. That's like mutual. So you have IP concerns from Arab world countries, but you have also IP concerns from tech companies in China trying to invest in the Arab world. So these are the main negative elements of trying to implement the BRI in the region. Negative, positive. Same thing, you think of EU, US, trying to establish their own legal model in the region, negatives, positives. And now I come to the comparison with the US and the EU. The first thing that comes to mind is the approach. The three parties start with a soft law approach. Let's create soft law instruments, ways of dialogue, understanding. Let's create sort of cooperation, and then let's try based on that. Once we have the trust via a soft law approach, let's use that to try to develop more practical, more binding instruments. Now, there are some distinctions. Yeah, US, EU focus more on formal treaties. China is more of flexible instruments. And the way the structure and the normative goals and institutions also varies. In the EU, you have the European Commission drafting agreements. So we'll see that with the Arab world. In China, you have the different departments, Department of Foreign Affairs, Department of Commerce. Same in China, you have the, in the US here in China, you have the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Energy and Trade. Each party has its own sets of institutions and structure based on which they establish the agreements. But the principles are the same. We start with a soft law approach and we get to something more binding and practical. Now, let's start with US approach. US has bilateral and multilateral treaties. They have the NAFTA Accords. They recently signed the Abraham Accords they contribute to the Abraham Accords between Israel and the Arab countries to establish peace. You have diplomacy, you have sanctions. Recently, the sanctions on Syria were removed, for instance, due to the Trump visit to Saudi Arabia. So sometimes bilateralism is being used, sometimes multilateralism is being used. How about the EU? Well, the EU adopted a lot of association agreements with the Arab world. These association agreements are more or less conditional. They have to adopt European values based on non-discrimination, respect for human rights. Otherwise, they don't get funding. It even established an ENP, European Neighborhood Policy Program, based on which you have sort of funding provided and collaboration between both parties. And right now, we also have extraterritorial effect of specific instruments like the General Data Protection Regulation. Again, same thing, different rules, different instruments, different structures, but the same approach. So what are the difference between the goals? China's focus on sovereignty and non-intervenence, sort of neutral relation between China and the Arab world. US, EU more rule of law, human rights. In that sense, one could argue that the Chinese approach is more pragmatic. They have studied what is the situation there. They understand what are the values of these countries. And instead of imposing their own sets of values and ideas, they come up with a set of, okay, how do we create a win-win situation for both parties? So one could say it's more pragmatic than the European and American approach. So it's, in a way, it's similar, but it's different. But the main thing is the Chinese government does not have a supranational institution if you compare it to the EU, where there is a European Commission. At the same time, they all have the same idea. Let's employ a case-by-case situation. China signs MOUs, partnerships with Qatar, Morocco. The EU establishes strategic or association agreements with Qatar and Morocco. But at the same time, they have multilateral forums and agreements with different countries. Takeaway. I'm going to repeat this for the last time. How did that start? I want to establish collaboration between China and Arab countries via BRI. It's the same legal model established with EU and US. We start with soft law rules, then we move to something binding and something more concrete. Now, what is different is the scale, the size, and the geopolitical strategy being used. These differ, but it's the same strategy. And that led to a hybrid system where there's flexibility based on which influence is there. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the comments.
Imad, now let's move to the last speaker, Jiankun. Present a paper about typical cases of China and Ibrahim, application of Confucius.
Okay.
The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you. May I use the slides? Yeah. Sorry. Thank you so much. No. Yeah, with the Chinese letters to see. Okay. Okay, great. So thank you so much, and thank you, Chair, Professor Palombino. I'm sorry if I named. And okay, and thank you, Professor Martinico and Professor Xueyan's invitation, and so I'm very honored to be here as a panelist. So before my speech, I actually would like to respond to, because yes, I think it's a panel discussion. So I think maybe I can respond to or give some dialogue with Professor Rossi and Professor Ibrahim. I'm sorry if I pronounced that. Yeah, because actually the first thing you mentioned is about the International Organization of Mediation. And actually I was involved with that. I was the draft convention. I was member of the convention draft as we call it the #1 text. So it's totally confidential. And actually I just published the paper like 3 days or 4 days ago about the International Organization for Mediation. So I also noticed that the headlines from some media that the China in Hong Kong, they would like to overturn the ICJ or blah, 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 something. But you have my words, you have the Chinese government's words. That is not the intention of the organization of the International Organization for Mediation. We call it IOM. Actually, we call it IOMAD, AMOD. Because this, as you have already stated, the International Organization for Mediation, the most different thing was what we say is the most creative things is about that they include all the different kinds of disputes. First is the states versus states, which usually would be governed by the ICJ. And also the second category is the state versus the investor. Like you said, the exit or PCA or ancestral rules is about the international investment claims arbitration. And the third is about the commercial or civil disputes between the different private parties. So the IOM intends to, or have already, because they just signed the ceremony of the convention on 30 May, so just a week ago in Hong Kong. And so they have already settled the, published the convention. Or if you are interested, I can send you the documents. It's public already. So that is the Chinese way, like you have mentioned, with the Confucius idea knowledge about we would like to amicable way, compare with the arbitration or litigation in the traditional way. So for mediation, it's like also the Chinese encouragement to resolving the different states or different parties' international disputes around the world. And also, like you have mentioned, with the exit, the BIT, because in China, in our academic in China, we might categorize it into 4 different generations of the BITs, because I'm an investment law scholar. So, like yes, in the first generation, we do not mention too much about the investment arbitration costs. In the second or third or fourth generation, and so we have included the exit, also the PCA, and also you can use the ancestral model rules, ancestral arbitration rules to govern the investment arbitration. But the very interesting thing is that China has never, or China was, how to say, well, China has never rejected or never overturn judgment, sorry, not judgment, a word from like exit or PCA or ancestral, or through the ancestral arbitration rules regarding the investment arbitration claims. Because in the, you know, like in the, like for commercial mediation, for commercial arbitration, we have the New York Convention to ensure the regulation and enforcement. But for the investment arbitration, we would abide by the exit convention. So in like Professor Rossi have mentioned that in China, the investment arbitration cases related to China has over 20 already actually. And so all the cases, otherwise it will be like settled or is still pending or it has been enforced. So I just want to give the examples more concrete, because that is also involving with my today's, in my topic today is about how the international treaties and also the company rules applied in China. And so also I have only one thing added to Professor Ibrahim's your presentation. It's very interesting. And also I think another distinct between the China or the US way or European way, but I'm not mean to any specific things, but I mean, in general, is that the Belt and Road Initiative or the other China's propositions is the different, the distinct is that with or without invasion or wars. So I think in China, it's always the peaceful way. I'm sorry if it is, okay. So, anyway, so then move to my topic today. It's about the typical cases, because I'm like a very young scholar maybe. So I just want to be a very concrete issues about the typical cases. So because after the Belt and Road Initiative put forward, there has like in China we have the Supreme People's Court. They will publish the different typical cases regarding the Belt and Road Initiative every year, not every year, like 2 years or 3 years a group. And oh, sorry, it's my very brief self-introduction. So I'm sorry. Working for China University of Political Science and Law, and before that, I was working for ANSI for Group 2 and Group 3. That's why I'm kind of familiar with the arbitration. And then I was working for my Unidroit, which is based in Rome. That was also my first job, actually. So I love Italy. And also from Wuhan University and Columbia Law School and Source Home for study. Anyway. And this is my contents. I noticed the time is very limited, so the chair. So if I may, I will just quick go through some parts of this. So first of all is the typical cases of the Belt and Road Initiative. Second is cases involving Italy. That's very interesting case. And then this is a very unique mechanism about CICC. And then is cases from the arbitration side is under the New York Convention. And then it's related rules and the conclusion. So due to the time, I will just go through very quickly. So this is the first group of BRI typical cases. I have noted the category, the classification of the different case and the significance. I can share with the slides if you're interested, but I don't think I have enough time to introduce that one by one. Anyway, so I'll just go through very quickly. And then it's the second group of the BRI typical case, but you can find that from the classification. It has like a really different wide range of the BRI related cases. But by the way, I would just like to say today's case is only about the civil and commercial matters, okay? And then, okay, let's go through quickly. The third one, the third group of BRI typical cases, because the first one is the Guangdong Medicine Group versus the complaint from Italy. And this is the product liability and also our affidavits in this case later, okay? And then let's go through very quick. Then the first group is about, it's just launched like 2 years, 2 years before, last year. So they have like 12 cases because each group that will only have like around 10 is between 8 to 10. So it's the different cases selected from all the courts in China related to the Belt and Road Initiative countries. Anyway, so it's just a very general quick through with the typical cases. And then by that, as we can say from the cases, the proportion is about, we can say the most biggest problem of is this the contract issues, and then is the regulation and enforcement of a judgment or a work. So because the regulation and enforcement, I know that Italy and China were all the member states of the New York Convention. So I think we share the same rules. But regarding the judgments, it's kind of maybe different. I'm not sure Italy has been a member of the Hague Convention about the judgment. No, not sure. Okay. It's all public laws. Sorry. Anyway, so I will just go very quick with the cases involving Italy, because this case, anyway, I will just very brief introduction. It's a medicine group and signs a contract with the China with another distribution, but the distribution has a contract with the China's medical company, and then the medicine has some problem. But the contract is between the distributor with the China's company. However, the distributor got the medicines from the Italy. So that's the basic facts. But this case is very interesting. Is that it's the very first case admitted and decided by the first international commercial court of the Supreme People's Court, as I said, CICC. I will introduce later. And this case concerned, the principle of privity of contract is from the common law. I think maybe everyone knows that. But in China, because China we succession from the civil law, but also we combination with some common laws principle. So this case has the concern about the different principle with the different legal system. How does it apply in the China's ports? And then, and also this case was first decided by the CICC. So it's very interesting because in China we not only have the different courts to govern the different international disputes, we have a separate, unique, the CICC. It's established by the Supreme People's Court of China, and they will only try the international commercial cases with very big, we can say, with some requirements. It's like let's say, I think it's over 30 million that will be the first trial, and also the first trial of the CICC is also the binding. So that's very different from the traditional court system in China, because usually we have the different trials, like the first and then you have appeal body and then the final. So, but this one is very like efficient because it's only would be the first instance, but also will be the binding instance. So, and yeah, that's the Macaulay's. Oh yes, only a sum over the 3 million RMB that will be going to this court. And then, anyway, so that is the thing about the litigation regarding the international commercial disputes. And then it's about arbitration. Arbitration, I will just give you a very general look because when I was working for UNCITRA, like, you know, the UNCITRA has a court, and in court they have included all the Chinese country, not all, the typical cases regarding the China to take the New York Convention for the regulation and enforcement of the international arbitration awards. So that's how China works today. Because like Professor Rossi put forward in the beginning about the IOM, because even if for the international organization for mediation, but China will never intend to replace or overturn the existed mechanism or existed convention. So anyway, I will just give a conclusion about the related rules about how the international treaties and conflict laws applied in China. Like in the far away ago, it's like in 1986, there is a general principle about the civil law, Article 142. So it has already settled the principle that the international treaty will be shall be applied if there is no if China has, unless the provisions are China has announced the reservations. But that is quite different because I studied in America. That's quite different from United States, because in the United States the international treaties is not the number one sequence when they come to the application for the cases. But in China, every time we respect and we insist to uphold the international treaties because we have I think that is from our law system. And we have the British law, have other related law regarding the same principle. But however, very unfortunately, on 2021, you know, the China, we have the civil code, the first civil code. In this civil code, it deleted this article. So in that time, there has a very big discussion in mainland China. But from other side, of course, besides the civil code, we also have the law regarding the choice of law for the foreign related civil relationships. And for this law, about these the interpretations, it has also settled the principle of how the international treaties and also including the general practice applied in China. But at 2020, regarding the amendment of the interpretations, also deleted the related articles. However, just like 1.5 years ago in 2023, December 28th, the Supreme People's Court have another interpretation to reform the true principles about how the international treaties and international customary rules applied in China from the civil and commercial cases. So the first one is priority of the international treaties. It prevails every time. And then is the principle of filling in the gaps. If of the international practices. So it's also including the custom international law. And so anyway, it's just a very concrete issues to introduce to you guys about the civil and the commercial cases in China, because like everyone said, the Bride Initiative, of course, will also initiate a lot of commercial disputes. So if you have the disputes, then if you have any questions about the China's court system, I think that may a little bit help. So that's my presentation. I hope I didn't go beyond the time. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful Pisa day. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, really. The debate is open, and so if some of you would like to put any questions to our speakers, I have a question as well, but maybe at the end. No, please.
Thanks indeed. My first question is for Imad. I really like your presentation, also the critical punch there. I have been working on soft law in a comparative manner, and it seems to me that, but I would like to know what you think. It seems to me that we still tend to approach the distinction between soft law and hard law because great minds to think alike, you know, and because great minds think alike, man, I told you, bro. So we still to tend to approach, I mean, this distinction as if it were a sort of dichotomy. But actually what the comparative law suggests is that very frequently soft law works as a sort of waiting room to, I mean, create the consensus, and then very frequently soft law is partly or totally codified by subsequent hard law measures. Do you think that this is confirmed in all the experiences you have taken into account for your paper, or do you still see differences? And that's my question for you. For Pierfrancesco, I really enjoyed your presentation. I also noticed that at the very end of your talk, you also refer to the very tricky problem of how to translate, I mean, some words and some concepts. I mean, frequently, that's the beauty of the comparative law, after all. But in comparative law, we have many false friends, as the scholars and linguistics would say. But my question for you is, don't you think that sometimes we tend to exaggerate a bit, I mean, when distinguishing between norms and values, because there are normative systems in which actually values are also seen as norms. And there are very decent examples of, for instance, also at the EU level, recently, the Court of Justice said that the things that are called values in Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union actually are binding norms. So my point is, can we really, I mean, think that this distinction is useful, or perhaps it depends on the legal system we take into account? Thanks so much. I really enjoyed your talks.
Sorry, I had the same question to say, and in general, I would say that soft law works in international law exactly as in comparative law. There is no difference from this point of view. My question was a more general one. So, what do you mean by soft law from this point of view? And secondly, that's the other question. Of course, you mentioned the fact that I mean, the approach followed by China by using soft law instrument reflects always flexibility. But I mean, when we talk about flexibility, that's flexibility on the perspective of China, but also from the standpoint of the other states. So I mean, it's not necessarily something bad in itself. And so I would like to know your opinion in this regard. That's all.
Okay.
Other question, just to put all questions together, please. Maybe, yeah. Ce l'abbiamo un microfono. Okay, come here.
Actually, this is not necessarily a question, but possibly more or less like even though the BRI is not characterized by institutions, but nevertheless, we do have a lot of agreements that can be used by participating nations as well as China. For example, we have concluded at least 22 free trade agreements, and all these agreements certainly can be utilized by the participating nations like Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries, and even countries like Chile and Costa Rica, so on and so forth. Yeah, and these agreements certainly can cover lots of issues that may arise from Belt Road construction. And in addition to that, we have more than 100, something like 130 bilateral investment agreements, even though these agreements can be categorized as 3 categories or 4 categories, but nevertheless, these agreements actually can play a role, not only for Chinese investors. You might be interested in whether soft law or something like it have been incorporated in these agreements. And strictly speaking, when it comes to investment agreements, possibly China did not contribute too much. But when it comes to free trade agreement, China did have something to contribute. For example, quite a number of in free trade agreements. Normally, there's a commission, whether they call it a commission or this way or that way, are incorporated. This commission is mandated to not necessarily to solve the dispute, but at least to maintain sort of communication, so it can be used to solve disputes. So I think that is also a very interesting phenomenon development in this regard. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I might have a question from the chat. I have no idea. Let's see. So now I learned how to. No, we have no questions from the chat.
Okay, please.
Okay, while I was listening to the questions and the conversation, there is a point we need to make a distinction, because that's where we could start. If we want to argue the conversation between soft and hard law, the first distinction we need to make is between domestic and international soft law. So because that affects the way these two interact. So if I want to first, because my presentation was more about the use of domestic soft law as an instrument influencing other nations than international law. So if I follow, and rightfully so, what Giuseppe said, you have usually international instruments then that are soft law, and then with time they become hard law. Yes, but if we look at it from a domestic perspective, that's not often the case. So for instance, in the case of China, the Chinese 5 principles of cooperation, of peaceful coexistence, these are bases for soft law, but they were never used directly as an instrument as hard law. They were incorporated later on within specific agreements or within specific instruments in practice. So and I'm just thinking out loud here while I'm listening to both of you talk about this distinction between soft and hard law domestically, internationally. And if I go back to your question about, is it always the case whether soft law becomes international law binding? I think we are at a point where sometimes we have soft laws that are more effective than hard laws by remaining soft laws, because due to the is flexibility good? Is flexibility bad? I guess it's good and bad at the same time, depending on how you see it, and depending on the interests of the countries that are there. So if being by flexibility, it means giving both parties a room or margin to maneuver to adopt an agreement later on that suits both interests, then yes. Is by flexibility we mean having a freedom and to interpret things in a way that suits your interests as a state and try to run around from obligation, then of course it's not. So it depends on the way it's being used as flexibility. So is it good? Yes, but it can be also bad. And finally, to go back to the point raised by Professor for China's contribution to soft law, we never said China did not contribute to soft law. We actually acknowledged that China is always contributing to soft law developments through its agreements. The point made is that the approach used is similar to other approaches used by the EU and the US, but no one is denying or saying that China is not contributing heavily actually with its soft law using its own values and Confucius understanding of how law should be, and even the rule of law with Chinese characteristics. Thank you.
Do you want to add something? Anything else? Do you? Yeah.
I just want to
respond to
Thank you, Giuseppe, for the question. So, well, we international lawyers like to operate under the pretense that international law means the same thing for everybody. And this pretense has been challenged in recent scholarship because there is this growing tendency to use a comparative method in international legal studies, up to the point of asking whether international law is actually international. That's the title of the book of Anthea Roberts read. So yeah, I believe this is true. It's very true that the same thing can mean different things in different environments. But when it comes to those values, like the specific values that I mentioned before, well, of course, a value can be a rule or a norm and vice versa. But I was referring to Chinese domestic values, and Chinese domestic values are not norms of international law, at least for the time being. Yeah. So I'm not sure whether or not they can qualify as proper legal rules in their own domestic legal system. That I don't know, frankly. But what I was referring to was this external projection of Chinese domestic values that, I mean, by all accounts, they do not qualify as international legal rules. You would say, yeah, well, we don't know that, of course, and you need some type of international consensus for having, for elevating them to the status of international legal rules. So, I mean, are the customary international law, there are some rules for its, of course, for its existence. General principles in international law, also there's a method to that. So that was my point. Then there are some values in international law that I believe everybody agrees on, and they could be rules. Like, for example, those that you mentioned, the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. You mentioned them. It's interesting because we mentioned them in the soft law category, but I'm not sure if all the Chinese in the room would agree, because I mean they have the, I don't know, I mean they used to be, I mean, since the Bandung conference, they've always been presented as these pillars of international law for at least the third world countries.
In the UN Charter. So from that aspect, that should be sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
I mean, because of the 5 principles of the peaceful coexistence has been included in the UN Charter article. I don't remember the specific article. So from that side, from that perspective, that should be a hard law. But of course, from the principle itself, that may be some law.
Oh yeah, I mean, there is certainly some substantive overlap between some established rules of international law, like the principle of non-interference in internal affairs and the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. So yes, there is, but of course, like, there is, of course, some underlying differences in the understanding on some basic concepts. What I was saying before is that international lawyers have come to realize that often when we use the same words in international law, we might not mean the same thing. And that's the field of comparative international law that is kind of developing. So yeah, we have some rules on treaty interpretation that are clearly not enough. They're fig leaf covering, I mean, underlying issues of vast proportions. It's not simply about interpreting a treaty. It's about what we mean by some basic terms like democracy. Everybody is invoking democracy, but what does it mean? Is it democracy between states or within states? Yeah.
I tend to disagree a little bit on the concept when you mentioned that the Chinese domestic law idea norms are not international law. I mean, what is international law? It's the law created by the victor of the Second World War with the Bretton Woods system and all the blah, blah, blah that comes after that. Then what is the Chinese norms? Where do you see that? You see that with the alternative sort of legal system being established by China and the BRICS countries. You have the Asian Development Bank, you have all of these alternative institutions in place that are being established in Asia. So if you could say, well, the attempt to create an alternative legal system at the global level is a reflection of how domestic Chinese norms are being tried to be reciprocated or used internationally as of creating a more sort of a polycentric competitive world. Sure.
Any comments? No?
Yes.
No, because Imad was actually speaking directly to me. Well, I guess we can agree to disagree on some of these things. I agree with you that there is a projection of Chinese domestic values internationally. That is evident. I mean, but however, we have some rules for the identification of international norms. So it's not enough that a state is moved by domestic values in its international activities to make groundbreaking transformations in international legal order. That's not what I believe is required. That could happen in the future, but that is, I guess, it's too early to tell. So yeah, that would be my position. Sorry.
Okay. Any additional questions from the public? Yeah, please.
Since you are talking about China contribution.
Yeah, please come here. Sorry.
Since you're talking about China contribution of soft law, possibly you should pay attention to the community of shared future for mankind. China is elaborating on this idea into a narrative and even a discourse that can be contributing to the development of international possible. That's my suggestion.
Okay. Do you want to add anything? So, in general, if you.
I have a question for her. From the cases, you mentioned a lot of cases, and we could not have the time to go through all of them. What do you think is besides the 2 points you mentioned in the end about the prioritization of international law, but if you look at these cases from your perspective, what do you think is the contribution of the Chinese decision courts that made through these cases to the further development of, you want to call it soft law, you want to call it attempt to create a soft law, you want to call it Chinese influence in the world, whatever you want to call it. What do you think is the long-term and short-term impact of the decisions made by Chinese courts in these cases?
For you as well. That was also impressive by the number of cases that you showed at your table. I don't know if could you please tell us something more about the methodology you used to select these cases, and I don't know if you also used the empirical research methods. I mean, I don't know if you also conducted interviews with judges. If you tell us something more about how you selected the cases in general. Thank you so much.
Okay. So, thank you. So first I will respond to the Professor Martico's question, because that's simple. Actually, it's not from my selection. It's from the Supreme People's Court of China selection. So they selected the different cases like every 2 years or 3 years. So regarding, and it's all published, it's all online. So you can just search it online. But I'm not sure if there is an English version, but of course you can find it online. And for the criteria to how to select them. So first of all, that is this case you should have some meaningful regarding the cases versus with Italy, because that's the first cases trialed by the ICICC. And also that has there's questions about actually it's like a breach of contract, but because of the principle of the civil privity, and then the breach of contract liability transferred to the tort liability. So it's also to show the China's interpretation of the different principles combined with the common law system and also civil law system. So that's how the group of the different Belt and Road Initiative cases came out. Okay, so thank you for the question. And regarding to Imad's question, so of course I'm not so good at soft law and hard law. I mean, that is the Professor Rossi's major, because but for me, from a private law scholar, I just want to answer that when you remember, when you ask about what's the short-term or long-term, or what's the contribution from China regarding this, I just want to note the one sentence. It's from the official government, and I think that's a perfect answer to all the questions, because in China, we always, let's be very accurate about because let's say the China should, China anyway, from here. So because China will always uphold the international system with the United Nations at its core, and the international order based on international law. That's a question. We call it international law, not international rules, like you have mentioned also like this question. And the basic norms of international relations based on the purposes and the principles of the UN Charter. Why I cited this sentence? Because this sentence is the attitude about China's government towards the world. We abide with the international treaties. We follow the treaties. We don't do like the exit the treaty after the Paris Convention, something like that. We join them, we respect them, and we insist on them. That is the most meaningful of the country, because that is not to say China should put some implications, will put some things on other countries. It's just to show that China, we follow the rules. So every country, if you want to come to China, cooperate with China, trust us, we have the law, we follow the law, and we respect the law. That's it. I think that's quite simple. But thank you so much. You have such a deep question, but I'm not good enough to answer that. Thank you so much. And yeah, the last thing I want to say, because the chair, when you give me the floor, you want to like make an end remarks, but I would just want to say, I think, and I agree, this is a very great panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thanks a lot for joining the panel. And okay, can I say, please enjoy the lunch? Or...